Welcome, traveler, to a story that begins with a single question that has haunted historians for centuries. How did farmers and fishermen from the frozen edges of the known world become the most feared warriors, the most daring explorers, and the most cunning traders of their age? How did a people with no written laws, no standing armies, and no great cities managed to reshape the entire medieval world in less than 300 years? The answer lies here, in the mist-shrouded fjords of Scandinavia, where the cold waters meet granite cliffs that have stood since time beyond memory. On the 8th of June, in the year 793, monks on a small island off the coast of Northumbria looked out at the gray sea and saw dragon-headed ships emerging from the morning fog. Within hours, the monastery of Lindisfarne lay in ruins, its treasures stolen, its brothers slain or taken as slaves. And across Christian Europe, a single terrified prayer began to echo through cathedral halls. From the fury of the Northmen, deliver us, O Lord. But here is what those trembling monks could never have imagined. Those raiders would one day found kingdoms from Ireland to Russia. Their descendants would sit on the thrones of England, Sicily, and Normandy. They would reach the shores of a continent that Europeans would not rediscover for another 5 centuries. They would establish the first parliament in human history and create trade networks stretching from the Arctic Circle to the markets of Baghdad. This is the complete story of the Viking Age, and you will witness every chapter unfold. We begin in the centuries before that fateful raid, when Scandinavian society was transforming, when shipwrights were perfecting vessels that could cross oceans, when population pressures and political ambitions were building toward an explosion that would shake the foundations of the medieval world. From there, we follow the longships across every sea they conquered. You will stand in the great trading halls of Hedeby and Birka. You will march with the great heathen army as it brings Anglo-Saxon kingdoms to their knees. You will sail the river routes to Constantinople, where Northmen served as elite guards to Byzantine emperors. You will cross the Atlantic to the frozen settlements of Greenland and the mysterious shores of Vinland. We will explore how these people lived, loved, worshipped their gods, raised their children, and buried their dead. We will meet the kings who unified nations, the explorers who charted unknown waters, and the women who held power in ways that would astonish the rest of medieval Europe. And we will witness the transformation as the White Christ slowly replaced the old gods, as raiders became rulers, and as the Viking Age drew to its dramatic close on a battlefield in northern England in 1066. If you find yourself drawn to these complete journeys through lost worlds, please subscribe so you do not miss our next exploration. Each week, we bring you the full story of a civilization that changed human history. Now, let us begin our journey in the centuries before the world knew to fear the Northmen, when the seeds of the Viking Age were first being planted in the rocky soil of Scandinavia. The land emerges from ice. For thousands of years, glaciers have gripped Scandinavia in frozen silence, but now they retreat northward, leaving behind a transformed world. Meltwater carves deep channels into ancient bedrock, creating the fjords that will define this peninsula's character. The sea rushes in to fill these wounds, bringing with it the promise of abundance. By the 6th century of the Common Era, the people who inhabit these shores have already spent generations learning the rhythms of this demanding landscape. They are descendants of Germanic tribes who migrated northward as the ice receded, carrying with them languages, gods, and traditions that will evolve into something distinctly Norse. The Roman Empire, which once traded amber and furs with their ancestors, has crumbled in the south, But here in the north, life continues according to patterns established long before any emperor claimed dominion over distant lands. The fjords dictate everything. Mountains plunge directly into salt water, leaving only narrow strips of arable land along the coastline. Farming alone cannot sustain communities, so the sea becomes both highway and harvest ground. Fishing provides sustenance through brutal winters when snow buries the earth for months. Seals and whales offer oil for lamps that push back the endless darkness of polar nights. The ocean is not a barrier, but a bridge connecting isolated settlements scattered along thousands of kilometers of coastline. Shipbuilding emerges as the essential craft. The earliest vessels are simple dugout canoes, hollowed from single tree trunks, adequate for sheltered waters but helpless against open ocean swells. Gradually, over generations, boat builders develop new techniques. They learn to split oak along its grain, creating thin planks that retain the wood's natural strength. These planks are overlapped and riveted together, forming holes that flex with the waves rather than fighting against them. The clinker-built method transforms maritime capability. Each strake overlaps the one below it, creating a hull that is simultaneously light and strong. Iron rivets secure the planks, while animal hair soaked in tar seals the seams against seawater. The resulting vessels can be dragged across portages, rowed up shallow rivers, and sailed across open stretches of sea that would swallow heavier craft. Society organizes itself around the longhouse. These timber structures stretch 30 meters or more, their turf-covered roofs blending into the landscape. Inside, a central hearth provides warmth and light, its smoke rising through gaps in the roof beams. Extended families share this space with their livestock during winter months, the animals' body heat helping to warm the interior. Benches line the walls, serving as seats by day and beds by night. Chieftains emerge through a combination of wealth, martial prowess, and generosity. A leader who cannot provide for his followers soon finds himself without followers. Gift-giving binds communities together, creating webs of obligation and loyalty that transcend simple kinship. Gold arm rings, fine weapons, and imported luxuries flow from chieftain to warrior, and in return, warriors pledge their swords and their lives. Trade routes already stretch far beyond Scandinavia. Amber from Baltic shores reaches Mediterranean markets. Furs from Arctic hunting grounds warm wealthy households in distant cities. Iron from Swedish mines travels south and east. These commercial connections bring foreign goods and foreign ideas into Norse communities, exposing them to the wealth that exists beyond their own horizons. The population grows. Farmland that once seemed adequate for small communities becomes insufficient for expanding families. Younger sons face futures without inheritance, without land, without prospects. The sea offers an alternative. Somewhere beyond the horizon lie other shores, other peoples, other opportunities. The ships improve with each generation. Keels grow deeper, providing stability in rough water. Masts rise from deck planking, carrying woolen sails that harness the wind. Navigation techniques develop through accumulated observation of stars, currents, and the flight patterns of birds. The technology of expansion takes shape in boatyards along every fjord. By the middle of the 8th century, all the elements align. The ships are ready. The warriors are trained. The pressure of population pushes against the limits of available resources. Scandinavia stands poised at the threshold of transformation, waiting only for the moment when ambition finally overcomes caution and the longships turn their prows toward distant, wealthy, unsuspecting shores. The moment arrives on a summer morning in 793 of the Common Era. The island of Lindisfarne rises from the cold waters off the Northumbrian coast, a tidal sanctuary where monks have prayed and copied manuscripts for over a century. The monastery founded by Saint Aidan in 635 stands as one of Christendom's most sacred sites, home to the illuminated Lindisfarne Gospels and the shrine of Saint Cuthbert. The brothers wake before dawn, as they have for generations, to chant the offices and tend their flocks. They do not see the ships approaching from the northeast. The longships emerge from morning mist like predators, their dragon-headed prows cutting through gentle swells. The vessels beach on the sandy shore with practiced precision, and armed men pour onto the strand. They carry axes, swords, and spears. They wear no crosses. They show no reverence for holy ground. What follows shatters the peace of Christian Europe. The raiders storm through the monastery complex, killing monks who resist, capturing others for slavery. They strip altars of gold and silver, seize jeweled reliquaries, tear precious metalwork from gospel covers. The library, repository of centuries of learning, holds no value for men seeking portable wealth. Blood stains the flagstones where prayers echoed hours before. The scholar Alcuin, serving at Charlemagne's court, receives news of the attack with horror. His letters preserve the shock that ripples across the Christian world. Never before has such terror appeared in Britain, he writes. The Church of St. Cuthbert, spattered with the blood of the priests of God, stripped of all its ornaments. A place more venerable than any in Britain has fallen to pagans. The Lindisfarne raid announces a new era. For the monasteries scattered along the coasts of Britain and Ireland, isolation that once provided spiritual retreat now creates vulnerability. These communities possess exactly what the raiders seek: concentrated wealth in portable form, accumulated through generations of royal patronage and pious donation. They maintain no military defenses. Their inhabitants practice nonviolence as religious principle. The following years bring escalating attacks. In 794, raiders strike Jarrow, the monastery where the venerable Bede composed his histories. In 795, they reach Iona, the sacred island where Columba established Celtic Christianity's greatest center. The pattern emerges with terrible clarity. Norse ships appear without warning, warriors overwhelm minimal resistance, wealth vanishes across the sea, survivors face death or enslavement. The raiders come from all three Scandinavian homelands. Danish ships probe the eastern coasts of Britain and the shores of Francia. Norwegian vessels target the Scottish Islands, Ireland, and the western approaches. The attacks remain opportunistic, conducted by independent chieftains seeking wealth and reputation rather than coordinated conquest. Coastal communities learn to watch the horizon with new dread. The sight of square sails brings panic. Churches relocate precious objects inland. Monks compose prayers against the fury of the Northmen. Yet the raids continue, probing deeper, striking harder, revealing the weakness of kingdoms fragmented by internal conflict. These early years establish the methods that will define Viking warfare for generations. Speed and surprise overcome defensive preparation. Superior seamanship allows escape before organized resistance materializes. The targeting of wealthy religious sites maximizes profit while minimizing military risk. Each successful raid finances the next expedition and attracts more warriors eager for silver and glory. The Christian kingdoms struggle to comprehend what confronts them. These are not the familiar enemies of territorial dispute or dynastic rivalry. The raiders want plunder, not negotiation. They worship gods unknown to Rome. They emerge from lands beyond the maps, from a frozen north that educated Europeans associate with the edge of the world. By 800, the initial shock gives way to grim recognition. The Northmen will return. The fury from the north has only begun. The secret lies in the forests. Towering oaks stretch toward pale northern skies, their trunks straight and true, grown slowly through centuries of cold winters and brief summers. These trees hold within their grain the potential for something unprecedented in human history. Vessels capable of crossing open oceans while navigating shallow rivers. Warships that combine speed with cargo capacity, and craft so perfectly balanced they seem to breathe with the sea itself. The shipwrights of Scandinavia inherit knowledge passed down through generations. Techniques refined since the Germanic Iron Age when the first clinker-built boats emerged from coastal workshops. But in the decades following the Lindisfarne raid, this ancient craft transforms into something revolutionary. The longship evolves from a regional vessel into the most sophisticated naval technology the medieval world has ever witnessed. The process begins with selection. Master builders walk through forests seeking oak trees of specific curvature, particular grain patterns, exact dimensions. A single warship requires timber from dozens of carefully chosen trees. The keel demands a trunk of exceptional length and straightness, sometimes exceeding 20 meters, while the ribs need naturally curved wood that follows the organic sweep of branches. Nothing is forced. The shipwright works with the wood's inherent character rather than against it. The keel emerges first, carved from a single massive timber, forming the spine upon which everything else depends. This foundational piece determines the vessel's ultimate length, its handling characteristics, its very soul. Scandinavian shipbuilders understand that the keel must flex slightly with wave action rather than resist rigidly. This flexibility, counterintuitive to other maritime traditions, allows their ships to survive North Atlantic storms that would shatter Mediterranean vessels. Strakes rise from the keel in overlapping rows, each plank fastened to its neighbor with iron rivets. This clinker construction creates a hull of remarkable strength-to-weight ratio. The overlapping edges provide structural rigidity, while the thin planks, sometimes only 2 centimeters thick, keep the vessel light enough for portage overland between river systems. A crew can carry their ship across land bridges, transforming obstacles into mere inconveniences. The mast steps into a massive block called the keelson, distributing the enormous forces of wind-filled sails throughout the hull. Woolen sails, woven by women whose craft proves as essential as the shipwright's own, catch winds that propel these vessels at speeds approaching 15 knots. The square rigging allows sailing with the wind, while skilled crews learn to tack against contrary breezes through techniques that astonish observers from other seafaring cultures. At Roskilde, at Hedeby, at countless fjordside workshops, the rhythm of construction continues through the 800s. Axes ring against timber, adzes smooth planking to precise thickness. The smell of pine tar fills the air as workers waterproof seams with a mixture of animal hair and resin. Each vessel takes months of labor from dozens of specialists, woodworkers, rope makers, sail weavers, blacksmiths forging the thousands of iron rivets required for a single hull. The results speak through performance. A fully laden longship draws less than 1 meter of water, allowing navigation up rivers that seem impossibly shallow. The same vessel crosses the open Atlantic, riding swells that would swamp deeper-hulled ships. Symmetrical bow and stern permit instant reversal without turning, a tactical advantage in combat and narrow waterways alike. These ships carry more than warriors. They transport horses for cavalry operations, trade goods for distant markets, settlers with livestock, and tools for new colonies. The versatility proves as important as the speed. A single vessel serves as warship, cargo hauler, and exploration craft, depending on the mission's demands. Yet these vessels carry something beyond cargo and warriors. They carry belief. The same craftsmen who shape oak into seaworthy hulls carve protective runes into stem posts, invoking powers older than memory. Dragon heads rear from prows not merely as decoration, but as guardians against hostile spirits dwelling at the unknown waters. The spiritual world of the Norse permeates every aspect of existence. No clear boundary separates the sacred from the mundane. The blacksmith heating iron invokes Völundr, the legendary smith. The farmer plowing fields honors Freyr, lord of fertility and abundance. The warrior preparing for battle calls upon Odin, the All-Father who sacrificed his eye for wisdom and hung 9 days upon Yggdrasil to gain the secrets of the runes. This cosmic tree stands at the center of Norse cosmology. Yggdrasil, the world ash, connects 9 realms in its branches and roots. Asgard rises among the highest branches, home to the Aesir gods who govern war, wisdom, and kingship. Midgard, the middle realm, belongs to humanity, encircled by the vast ocean where Jörmungandr, the world serpent, coils around all lands. Below stretches Hel, domain of the dead who perish from illness or old age rather than battle. The gods themselves embody contradictions that mirror human experience. Odin seeks knowledge with desperate hunger, wandering the worlds in disguise, trading pieces of himself for understanding. Thor protects the cosmic order with his hammer, Mjolnir, yet his strength serves chaos as readily as stability. Loki, the trickster, fathers monsters and causes Ragnarok, the twilight of the gods, yet without his cunning, the Aesir would lack their greatest treasures. At Uppsala, in the heart of Sweden, a great temple rises among sacred groves. Every 9 years, according to later accounts, 9 males of every creature, including men, hang from trees as offerings. The number 9 recurs throughout Norse practice, echoing Odin's 9 nights of sacrifice. Blood stains the roots of ancient trees, feeding powers that dwell beneath the earth. But formal temples remain rare. The Norse encounter their gods in natural places, groves where sunlight filters through leaves, springs where water emerges cold and clear from stone, mountains whose peaks pierce the clouds. Certain rocks bear the shapes of giants turned to stone by dawn light. Particular trees shelter spirits that have dwelt there since the world's beginning. The household maintains its own sacred center. The high seat pillars of the longhouse, carved with divine images, hold such power that settlers crossing the Atlantic throw them overboard near Iceland's coast, following where they drift to choose settlement sites. The hearth fire connects the living to ancestors who once gathered around the same flames. The threshold marks a boundary between the protected interior and the dangerous exterior world. Skalds preserve and transmit this spiritual knowledge through poetry of extraordinary complexity. Their verses employ kennings, compressed metaphors that encode mythological understanding. The sea becomes the whale road. Gold transforms into Sif's hair, recalling the story of Loki's theft and replacement. Battle becomes the storm of spears. These phrases require audiences to know the underlying myths, creating poetry that functions as religious education. The dead do not simply vanish. Warriors slain in battle may journey to Valhalla, Odin's hall, where they feast and fight eternally, preparing for Ragnarok. Others travel to Folkvangr, Freya's field, or to the halls of other gods. Ship burials send the deceased on final voyages, provisioned with weapons, tools, and sometimes sacrifice servants for the journey ahead. Vulvas, female seers, practice Seder, a form of magic involving trance states and prophecy. They travel between communities, welcomed and feared in equal measure, their visions revealing futures that cannot be escaped. Even Odin practices this feminine magic, accepting the shame attached to it in exchange for power over fate itself. The prophecies spoken by vulvas now manifest in iron and blood. In the autumn of 865, a fleet unlike any seen before appears off the coast of East Anglia. Hundreds of longships darken the horizon, their dragon prows cutting through gray waters, their sails bearing the black raven that symbolizes Odin's blessing upon warriors. The Anglo-Saxon Chronicle will record this force simply as the Mythical here, the Great Army. This is no summer raid. The men who step onto English soil have brought horses, supplies, and the determination to stay. They come from Denmark, from Norway, from Swedish settlements in the east, united not by a single king, but by a coalition of war leaders whose names will echo through centuries. Among them march the sons of the legendary Ragnar Lothbrok, seeking vengeance for their father's death in a Northumbrian snake pit, or so the sagas claim. East Anglia's king purchases peace with horses and provisions, allowing the invaders to winter on his lands. When spring arrives, the army rides north with terrifying speed. Northumbria, weakened by civil war between rival claimants to its throne, cannot mount effective resistance. York falls in 866, its Roman walls breached by warriors who care nothing for the city's ancient prestige. The following year brings catastrophe for Northumbrian resistance. Both rival kings die attempting to retake York, their armies shattered against Danish shields. The great army installs a puppet ruler and turns its attention southward. Mercia trembles. Wessex watches. The four kingdoms of Anglo-Saxon England face an enemy that fights not for plunder, but for permanent conquest. The army's strategy reveals sophisticated military thinking. Rather than dispersing to raid, the Danes concentrate their forces, overwinter in fortified camps, and strike when enemies least expect. They exploit political divisions, ally with local factions, and accept tribute only to break treaties when advantageous. Their mobility, mounted on horses seized or purchased, allows them to outmaneuver slower English levies. East Anglia falls in 869. King Edmund refuses to renounce Christianity or share power with pagans. The Danes execute him. Tradition claims by shooting him with arrows and beheading him, creating a martyr whose cult will spread across medieval England. Two of the four kingdoms have now collapsed. Mercia endures repeated invasions, its kings reduced to paying enormous tributes while watching their territory shrink. By 874, the Mercian king flees into exile, and the Danes partition his realm. Only Wessex remains unconquered, its young king Alfred facing the full weight of Danish ambition. The winter of 878 brings Alfred to his lowest point. A surprise Danish attack during Twelfth Night celebrations scatters his forces. The king retreats into the Somerset marshes with a handful of followers, hiding among the wetlands while enemies occupy his kingdom. Later legend will claim he burned cakes while sheltering with a peasant woman, so consumed by worry that he forgot his simple task. Yet, from these marshes, resistance rebuilds. Alfred summons the Firds of Somerset, Wiltshire, and Hampshire to meet him at Egbert's Stone. The men who answer have lost homes, families, and hope, but they have not lost their king. In May of 878, this reassembled army meets the Danes at Edington. The battle proves decisive. Alfred's forces hold their shield wall against repeated Danish charges, then counterattack when the enemy wavers. The Danes retreat to their fortified camp at Chippenham, where Alfred besieges them for 14 days. Starving and surrounded, the Danish leader Guthrum accepts terms that will reshape England forever. The Treaty of Wedmore establishes boundaries between Danish and English territory. Guthrum accepts baptism, with Alfred standing as his godfather, a symbolic submission that transforms a pagan warlord into a Christian king. The Danelaw emerges, a vast territory stretching from London to York, where Danish law and custom prevail. The Raven Banner has conquered half of England, but it has also met its match. The boundary drawn at Wedmore transforms England into two worlds existing within a single island. To the southwest, Alfred's Wessex remains Saxon, Christian, governed by ancient English law. To the northeast stretches the Danelaw, a territory where Scandinavian custom shapes every aspect of existence, where the language of the fjords mingles with Anglo-Saxon speech, where Thor's hammer hangs beside the Christian cross. The transformation of Jorvik reveals this new reality most vividly. The city the Romans called Eboracum, the Angles named Eoforwich, now bears a Norse name that will echo through centuries. Within its walls, a remarkable fusion unfolds. Danish settlers do not simply occupy, they integrate, adapt, and create something unprecedented in the medieval world. The streets of Jorvik pulse with commercial energy unknown in purely Saxon towns. Craftsmen work in workshops lining Coppergate, a name derived from the Norse word for cup makers. Amber from the Baltic arrives alongside jet from Whitby. Silk threads from Byzantium pass through Danish hands into Anglo-Saxon markets. The city becomes a node in trade networks stretching from Dublin to Baghdad, from Iceland to the Mediterranean. Archaeological evidence reveals the texture of daily life in this hybrid society. Houses built in Scandinavian style, with their central hearths and earthen floors, stand beside structures following Anglo-Saxon traditions. Combs carved from antler bear decoration, blending both artistic vocabularies. Coins minted in Jorvik display Christian symbols alongside Thor's hammer, hedging spiritual bets in a world of competing faiths. The legal landscape shifts as dramatically as the physical one. Danish law operates on principles unfamiliar to Saxon courts. The wapentake replaces the hundred as the unit of local administration, its name derived from the Norse custom of brandishing weapons to signal assent at assemblies. Disputes settle through systems emphasizing compensation over punishment, blood price over blood feud. Language itself transforms. Norse words infiltrate English speech, not through conquest's imposition, but through daily interaction between neighbors, trading partners, and intermarried families. Words for everyday objects, for legal concepts, for parts of the body enter the vocabulary. The pronouns they, them, and their, fundamental building blocks of English, arrive with Scandinavian settlers. Place names across the Danelaw preserve this linguistic heritage. Villages ending in by, meaning farmstead, in thorp, meaning settlement, in thwaite, meaning clearing. The 5 boroughs emerge as administrative centers of Danish power: Lincoln, Nottingham, Derby, Leicester, and Stamford. Each governs surrounding territory through jarls who answer, at least nominally, to the Danish king of Jorvik. These towns develop distinctive characters, their markets drawing farmers from surrounding countryside, where Scandinavian agricultural practices reshape the land. Yet, the Danelaw never achieves political unity. Danish leaders quarrel among themselves as readily as they fight Saxons. The kingdom of Jorvik passes through multiple hands, its throne contested by rival claimants from Denmark, from Ireland, from Norway. This fragmentation will prove fatal when Saxon kings begin their reconquest. Alfred's successors inherit his vision of a unified English kingdom. His son Edward and daughter Ethelflaed, the Lady of the Mercians, systematically construct fortified towns along the Danelaw's borders. These burhs serve as both defensive positions and administrative centers, slowly extending Saxon authority northward. The reconquest unfolds over decades. Borough by borough, the 5 boroughs submit to Edward's successors. By 954, the last Scandinavian king of Jorvik falls, and the Danelaw passes under English rule. But conquest does not erase the Danish presence. The settlers remain, their descendants becoming English subjects while retaining customs, names, and memories of northern origins. The Danelaw's legacy persists in ways visible and invisible. Legal traditions influence English common law for centuries. Place names mark the landscape like fossilized footprints. Genetic studies reveal Scandinavian ancestry concentrated precisely within the old Danelaw boundaries. A kingdom divided became a kingdom enriched, its conquerors absorbed into the fabric of a nation they had sought to destroy. While England absorbs its Danish settlers, another great river system draws Norse ambitions southward. The Seine flows through the heart of Francia, a silver highway leading to treasures beyond imagination. And in the spring of 845, a fleet of 120 longships enters its mouth, carrying warriors who will bring the Carolingian Empire to its knees. The man who leads them passes into legend under the name Ragnar. Whether he exists as a single historical figure or represents a composite of several chieftains, the chronicles agree on what happens next. The fleet advances upriver with terrifying speed, the shallow-drafted vessels gliding past fortifications designed to stop deeper-hulled ships. Frankish defenders watch helplessly as the serpent-prowed armada penetrates deeper into their kingdom than any enemy has reached in living memory. Paris, in 845, stands as the spiritual and commercial heart of West Francia. The city spreads across an island in the Seine, its monasteries housing relics of saints, its warehouses storing wealth from across the Carolingian realm. King Charles, later called the Bald, scrambles to assemble a defense. He divides his army, positioning forces on both riverbanks. The decision proves catastrophic. Ragnar strikes one half of the divided Frankish force on Easter Sunday, a date chosen with deliberate sacrilege. 111 prisoners hang from trees on an island in full view of the Parisian defenders, a sacrifice to Odin that breaks Frankish morale as effectively as any battle. Charles faces an impossible choice. His treasury opens, and 7,000 pounds of silver flow into Norse hands. The raiders withdraw, but they have learned something invaluable. Francia will pay rather than fight. The lesson spreads across Scandinavia like fire through dry timber. Throughout the following decades, Viking fleets returned to Frankish rivers with increasing frequency and boldness. The Seine, the Loire, the Garonne become highways of plunder. Monasteries burn, towns empty at the first sight of square sails on the horizon. The Carolingian Empire, already weakened by civil wars among Charlemagne's grandsons, fragments further under relentless pressure. Fortifications rise along the rivers. Charles the Bald orders bridges built at strategic points, their spans designed to block longship passage. The bridge at Pitre on the Seine represents the most ambitious project, its construction consuming years and vast resources. Yet, the Vikings adapt, portaging their vessels around obstacles, or simply overwhelming defenders before fortifications reach completion. By 885, a new generation of Norse leaders eyes Paris with fresh ambition. The city has grown stronger, its defenses improved, its population swollen with refugees from ravaged countryside. But the Viking force that appears in November of that year dwarfs anything seen before. 700 vessels carry perhaps 30,000 warriors up the Seine. They come not merely to raid, but to conquer. The siege begins in late November. Count Odo of Paris commands the defense, his garrison numbering perhaps 200 knights and a few thousand militia. The disparity seems insurmountable, yet Paris holds advantages the Vikings cannot overcome. The fortified bridges block river passage. The island city requires assault across water. And Odo proves a commander of exceptional determination. Months pass in brutal stalemate. Viking siege towers burn under showers of boiling oil and pitch. Assault after assault breaks against stone walls and desperate defenders. Disease spreads through the besieging camp. Winter cold claims warriors accustomed to hardship, but unprepared for static siege warfare. The Vikings excel at swift strikes and naval maneuver, not patient investment of fortified positions. Spring of 886 brings Emperor Charles the Fat with a relief army. The moment seems ripe for decisive victory. Instead, Charles negotiates. He pays the Vikings to withdraw, granting them permission to sail up the Seine and plunder Burgundy, a region that had refused him tribute. The defenders who held Paris through months of suffering watch their emperor reward the enemy. The siege's aftermath reshapes Francia. Charles the Fat's disgrace contributes to his deposition. Odo, the hero of Paris, eventually claims the crown. The Carolingian dynasty staggers toward extinction, while regional strongmen rise to fill the vacuum. Among the consequences of this transformation, one proves most significant. Within 25 years, a Viking chieftain named Rollo will receive lands at the Seine's mouth, founding a duchy that will reshape European history. The lands Rollo receives stretch along the lower Seine, a territory devastated by decades of raiding. Fields lie fallow, monasteries stand empty, villages have been abandoned. Yet this wasteland represents something unprecedented in Viking history. For the first time, a Norse warlord gains legitimate title to Frankish soil through treaty rather than conquest. The agreement at Saint-Clair-sur-Epte in 911 creates an arrangement that benefits both parties. Charles the Simple, King of West Francia, desperately needs defenders for his vulnerable northern coast. Rollo commands warriors who have spent years learning every inlet, every river approach, every weakness in Frankish defenses. By granting these raiders the very lands they have plundered, Charles transforms predators into protectors. The terms require Rollo's baptism. The Viking chieftain kneels before Archbishop Franco of Rouen, receiving the Christian name Robert. Whether genuine conversion or political calculation, this act severs Rollo from his pagan past and binds him to Frankish aristocratic networks. His marriage to Gisla, daughter of Charles, further cements the alliance through blood. The transformation begins immediately. Rollo proves as capable at governance as he was at warfare. He redistributes lands among his followers, creating a loyal warrior aristocracy with stakes in the territory's prosperity. Norse settlers arrive to farm the rich alluvial soils. The population stabilizes, then grows. The new duchy develops a hybrid character unlike anything else in Europe. Norse settlers adopt Frankish language within 2 generations, yet retain Scandinavian legal customs. The word for their territory emerges from their identity. Normandy, land of the Northmen. Their descendants will speak French, worship Christ, and build churches, yet carry Viking blood and Viking ambitions. Rollo's son, William Longsword, continues the consolidation. He expands Norman territory westward, absorbing the Cotentin Peninsula and the Channel Islands. He navigates the treacherous politics of Frankish succession disputes, sometimes supporting, sometimes opposing various claimants. His assassination in 942 by Flemish nobles demonstrates how thoroughly the Normans have integrated into continental power struggles. The young Richard I inherits a duchy under siege. Frankish nobles attempt to exploit his minority, invading Norman lands. Yet the crisis reveals Norman resilience. Richard survives, matures, and rules for over 50 years, transforming Normandy from a precarious frontier territory into a stable, prosperous state. Under Richard, Norman monasteries revive. Jumièges, Fécamp, and Mont Saint-Michel become centers of learning and piety. Norman churches rise in Romanesque splendor, their architecture blending Frankish traditions with something harder, more austere. Norman knights develop cavalry tactics that will later conquer England, Sicily, and the Holy Land. The duchy's position proves strategically vital. Controlling both banks of the Lower Seine, Normandy commands the approaches to Paris. Its ports face England across the narrow channel. Its borders touch Brittany, Maine, and the Île-de-France. Every power in northwestern Europe must reckon with Norman strength. By the century's end, Normandy has become something its founder could never have imagined. The ragged band of Vikings who accepted baptism in 911 has evolved into a feudal aristocracy, French-speaking and Christian, yet retaining the martial vigor of their Scandinavian ancestors. The transformation seems complete, yet the Viking spirit endures beneath the surface. Norman lords remain restless, ambitious, hungry for conquest. Their eyes turn toward new horizons. Some will venture south to carve kingdoms from Byzantine and Arab territories in Italy and Sicily. Others will look across the Channel toward England, where another descendant of Rollo will claim a throne in 1066. The treaty at Saint-Clair-sur-Epte created more than a duchy. It created a people who would reshape medieval Europe, carrying Viking blood and Viking ambition into new centuries and new conquests. While Norman lords consolidate their French territories, another current of Norse expansion flows in the opposite direction. Eastward, beyond the Baltic's gray waters, rivers carve pathways through endless forests toward distant empires of unimaginable wealth. The Varangian route emerges not from sudden discovery, but from generations of gradual exploration. Swedish traders and warriors, distinct from their Danish and Norwegian cousins who sail westward, turn their attention toward the rising sun. The Baltic Sea becomes their highway, its eastern shores opening into river systems that penetrate deep into Slavic lands. These eastern Vikings develop vessels suited to different waters. Where Atlantic longships require deep keels for ocean swells, the rivers of the East demand shallow drafts capable of navigating rapids and portages. Boats must be light enough for crews to carry overland between waterways, yet sturdy enough to survive journeys spanning thousands of miles. The Dnieper River becomes the great artery of eastern commerce. From its headwaters near Novgorod, the route descends southward through lands of Slavic tribes, past cataracts that require careful navigation, toward the Black Sea and the golden domes of Constantinople. The Greeks call this city simply the city, but to the Norse it becomes Miklagard, the great city, a name whispered with reverence in mead halls from Uppsala to Hedeby. Byzantine Constantinople in the 9th and 10th centuries represents the wealthiest metropolis in the Christian world. Its markets overflow with silk from China, spices from India, gold from Africa, and craftsmanship surpassing anything Northern Europe can produce. For Vikings accustomed to trading furs, amber, and slaves, Miklagard offers riches beyond comprehension. The journey itself becomes legendary. Traders departing Swedish shores in spring might not reach Constantinople until autumn, having navigated countless rivers, negotiated with Slavic chieftains, and survived the Dnieper's 7 deadly cataracts. Each rapids bears a Norse name, recorded by Byzantine observers, testament to generations of Scandinavian passage. Portages between river systems require extraordinary effort. Entire boats must be dragged overland, sometimes for miles, through territories where hostile tribes await opportunities for ambush. Yet, the prophets justify every hardship. Arabic silver dirhams flow northward in quantities that transform Scandinavian economies, while Byzantine silk and weaponry become status symbols among northern elites. The relationship between Vikings and Byzantium evolves beyond mere commerce. Byzantine emperors, perpetually threatened by enemies on multiple frontiers, recognized the military value of these fierce northerners. By the late 10th century, Varangians serve as elite imperial bodyguards, their loyalty purchased with gold and their ferocity directed against the empire's foes. The Varangian Guard becomes the most prestigious military unit in Constantinople. These Norse warriors, bound by oaths to the emperor rather than to Byzantine political factions, provide protection that native troops cannot guarantee. Their axes become symbols of imperial authority, their presence in the palace a constant reminder of northern martial prowess. Trade goods moving along the Varangian route reveal the scope of this commercial network. Furs from Arctic regions, honey and wax from Slavic forests, and slaves captured in raids travel southward. Returning northward come Byzantine coins, silk textiles, glassware, and weapons of superior craftsmanship. Runestones across Sweden commemorate men who died on eastern journeys, their inscriptions recording voyages to Greece, to Sörkland, to distant lands where fortunes awaited the bold. The cultural exchange proves equally significant. In Norse travelers encounter Orthodox Christianity, Islamic merchants and civilizations possessing written traditions, architectural achievements, and administrative sophistication unknown in Scandinavia. Some return home transformed, carrying new ideas alongside their trade goods. This eastern expansion creates connections spanning continents. A silver coin minted in Baghdad might pass through Varangian hands in Kyiv before reaching a Swedish farmstead. Byzantine artistic motifs appear in Scandinavian metalwork. The world grows smaller through these river highways, linking the frozen north to the Mediterranean's ancient civilizations through networks of commerce, warfare, and cultural transmission that reshape medieval Europe's eastern frontier. The rivers that carry Byzantine gold and Arab silver northward also carry ambition in the opposite direction. Along these waterways, Norse settlers transform from seasonal traders into permanent rulers, establishing dynasties that will shape Eastern Europe for centuries. The chronicle traditions speak of a moment around 862 when Slavic and Finnic tribes, exhausted by internal conflict, invite Varangian leaders to bring order to their lands. Whether this invitation represents historical fact or later justification for foreign rule, the result proves undeniable. A chieftain named Rurik establishes himself at Novgorod, creating a power base that will spawn an empire. Novgorod rises where the Volkhov River flows from Lake Ilmen, a natural crossroads controlling access to both the Baltic and the interior waterways leading south. The settlement grows rapidly under Norse leadership, its wooden walls enclosing a population of Slavs, Finns, and Scandinavians living in uneasy cooperation. The Varangians bring military organization, trading connections, and administrative techniques learned from their Baltic homeland. Rurik's death, around 879, passes power to a kinsman named Oleg, who recognizes that Novgorod alone cannot control the lucrative southern trade routes. His ambition focuses on Kyiv, a Slavic settlement perched on bluffs overlooking the Dnieper River. In 882, Oleg seizes the city through cunning rather than siege, establishing Kyiv as the new center of Varangian power. The choice proves strategically brilliant. Kyiv commands the middle Dnieper, controlling traffic between the northern forests and the Byzantine frontier. From these heights, rulers can tax every vessel carrying furs southward or silk northward. The city becomes the heart of what chroniclers will call Kievan Rus, a realm stretching from the Baltic approaches to the Black Sea steppes. Successive rulers expand and consolidate this inheritance. Igor, considered Rurik's son, campaigns against Constantinople itself, though Byzantine Greek fire devastates his fleet. His widow Olga, ruling as regent, travels to Constantinople around 957, accepting baptism and establishing diplomatic relations that will transform her realm. Her grandson Vladimir faces a choice that will define Russian civilization. By 988, Vladimir rules a vast but spiritually fragmented domain. Paganism persists alongside Christianity, Islam, and Judaism, practiced by various subjects and neighbors. The prince's decision to adopt Byzantine Orthodox Christianity represents more than personal conversion. Mass baptisms in the Dnieper River mark the beginning of Russia's thousand-year relationship with Eastern Christianity. Kyiv itself transforms under this new faith. Wooden temples to Perun and other Norse Slavic deities give way to stone churches built by Byzantine craftsmen. The city's skyline sprouts golden domes that catch the steppe sunlight, visible for miles across the surrounding plains. Monasteries become centers of literacy, preserving both religious texts and the historical chronicles that record these very events. The Varangian element gradually dissolves into the Slavic majority. Norse names evolve into Slavic forms. Trading customs blend with agricultural traditions, and the warrior elite intermarries with local nobility. Yet the dynasty Rurik founded will rule Russian lands until 1598, an unbroken chain spanning over 7 centuries. This transformation from Norse warband to Orthodox Christian kingdom represents the Viking Age's most profound political achievement. The raiders who once sought silver and slaves become the founders of a civilization that will eventually span 11 time zones. The river routes that Varangian traders pioneered become the arteries of an empire, connecting the Baltic to the Black Sea through networks of commerce and governance that outlast their Scandinavian origins by a millennium. While dynasties rise along eastern rivers and Norman lords build their French domains, the true foundation of Viking civilization lies not in conquest, but in the daily rhythms of Scandinavian homesteads. The longhouse stands at the center of Norse existence, a structure of remarkable engineering that shelters families, livestock, and the accumulated wisdom of generations beneath a single roof. These buildings stretch 60 to 90 feet in length, their curved walls of timber and turf rising from the earth like overturned ships. The comparison is deliberate. The same craftsmen who build longships construct longhouses, applying identical techniques of overlapping planks and flexible joinery. Smoke from the central hearth drifts upward through gaps in the thatched roof, filling the interior with a perpetual haze that preserves the wooden beams and keeps insects at bay. The hearth itself serves as the household's sacred center. Flames burn continuously from autumn through spring, tended by women who understand that its extinction brings not merely cold, but spiritual misfortune. Around this fire, families gather for meals, storytelling, and the endless work that sustains life in northern latitudes. Benches line the walls, serving as seating by day and sleeping platforms by night, covered with furs and woolen blankets against the penetrating chill. Beyond the longhouse, the farmstead spreads across cleared land wrested from forest and marsh. Barley and oats grow in small fields during the brief northern summer, while cattle, sheep, and pigs provide meat, milk, and wool. The agricultural calendar dictates existence, planting in late spring, haymaking in summer, harvest in autumn, and the long indoor months of winter when craftwork and storytelling fill the darkness. Women manage the household economy with authority that surprises observers from other cultures. They hold the keys to storage chests, control food distribution, and supervise the complex textile production that clothes families and provides trade goods. Spinning and weaving occupy countless hours, transforming raw wool into the sturdy wadmal cloth that serves as both clothing and currency throughout the Norse world. Children learn their roles early. Boys accompany fathers to fields and fishing grounds, absorbing agricultural knowledge and seamanship through observation and practice. Girls work alongside mothers, mastering the domestic arts that will define their adult responsibilities. Education occurs through participation rather than instruction, skills passing from generation to generation through shared labor. The extended family forms the basic social unit, with multiple generations sharing the longhouse's interior. Grandparents contribute wisdom and lighter tasks, their presence ensuring continuity of tradition and custom. Thralls, slaves captured in raids or born into bondage, perform the heaviest labor, their status hereditary but not entirely hopeless, as manumission remains possible through faithful service or purchase. Seasonal rhythms shape religious observance. Midwinter celebrations honor the returning sun with feasting and sacrifice. Spring festivals mark planting time with offerings to ensure fertility. Autumn gatherings give thanks for harvest while preparing for the dark months ahead. These ceremonies occur at household altars and community gathering places, connecting daily existence to the cosmic order maintained by the gods. The Thing Assembly brings free farmers together for legal matters. Disputes resolve through established custom rather than written law. Every free man possesses the right to speak, to vote, and to bear arms in defense of community decisions. This participatory governance, rooted in the practical necessities of scattered settlement, plants seeds that will eventually flower into parliamentary traditions across the Norse world. trade supplements, subsistence farming, connecting isolated homesteads to wider networks of exchange. Furs, amber, and walrus ivory flow outward, while iron tools, salt, and luxury goods return. Market towns emerge at convenient harbors, their seasonal populations swelling as farmers become temporary merchants before returning to agricultural responsibilities. This domestic foundation supports every Viking achievement. The raiders who terrify European monasteries return to farmsteads where wives manage accumulated wealth. The traders who reach Constantinople carry goods produced in Scandinavian workshops. The settlers who colonize distant islands recreate the longhouse culture that defines Norse identity, adapting familiar patterns to new landscapes while preserving essential traditions that connect scattered communities across vast distances. The seasonal markets that draw farmers from their longhouses expand into something far more permanent along the coasts of Scandinavia. By the 9th century, trading centers emerge that operate year-round, their populations sustained not by agriculture, but by commerce itself. These emporia become the beating hearts of a network stretching across 3 continents. Hedeby rises at the base of the Jutland Peninsula, positioned where overland routes connect the North Sea to the Baltic. Merchants portage goods across this narrow neck of land, rather than risk the dangerous voyage around Denmark's northern tip. The town grows to perhaps 1,000 permanent residents by the mid-9th century, swelling to several thousand during trading seasons. Workshops line narrow streets where craftsmen transform raw materials into finished goods. Amber workers shape Baltic gold into jewelry destined for distant markets. Bone carvers produce combs, gaming pieces, and decorative objects. Metal workers forge weapons, tools, and ornaments that blend Scandinavian designs with foreign influences. Birka occupies an island in Lake Mälaren, deep within Swedish territory, yet connected to eastern trade routes through river systems flowing toward the Baltic. The town's protected harbor shelters vessels arriving from across the known world. Archaeological excavations reveal the extraordinary reach of Viking commerce through objects buried with Birka's merchants. Arabic silver dirhams appear in quantities suggesting regular contact with Islamic trading networks. Byzantine silk fragments indicate connections to Constantinople. Frankish glass and Rhenish pottery demonstrate Western European trade. Goods from the British Isles, the Slavic lands, and the distant steppes all converge in this island marketplace. The silver that flows into Scandinavia transforms Norse society. Arabic dirhams, minted in caliphates stretching from Spain to Central Asia, become the primary currency of Viking commerce. These coins arrive through multiple channels. Varangian traders carry them northward along Russian rivers after exchanging furs, slaves, and amber in markets along the Volga and Dnieper. Other routes bring Islamic silver through intermediaries in the Khazar lands. The volume proves staggering. Scandinavian hoards contain more Arabic silver than survives in the Islamic world itself, testament to the scale of northern commerce. Furs drive much of this eastern trade. Scandinavian trappers and their Sami trading partners harvest pelts that command extraordinary prices in southern markets. Sable, marten, beaver, and fox furs travel from Arctic hunting grounds to warm the shoulders of Byzantine emperors and Arab caliphs. Walrus ivory from northern waters substitutes for elephant ivory in workshops across the Mediterranean. Amber, fossilized resin gathered along Baltic shores, reaches craftsmen from Ireland to Baghdad. The slave trade forms another pillar of Viking commerce, uncomfortable though modern observers find this reality. Captives taken in raids across Europe and purchased from Slavic territories flow through Scandinavian markets toward Islamic lands where demand remains constant. Dublin becomes a major slave market. Hedeby processes human cargo alongside other goods. The Arabic sources that describe Norse merchants emphasize this traffic, recording prices and conditions that illuminate a brutal commerce. Textiles move in multiple directions. Scandinavian women produce woolen cloth that finds markets across northern Europe. Frisian traders carry these fabrics southward while returning with Frankish weapons and Rhenish wine. Silk travels the opposite direction, arriving from Byzantine workshops through Varangian intermediaries or from Islamic sources through Eastern routes. The finest examples appear in elite burials, fragments of luxury that demonstrate the reach of Norse commercial networks. Weapons and iron goods flow outward from Scandinavian forges. Frankish swords, highly prized for their quality, travel northward through legitimate trade and as plunder. Scandinavian smiths study these imports, eventually producing blades that rival continental craftsmanship. The pattern-welded swords buried with wealthy Vikings represent the pinnacle of early medieval metallurgy. By the 11th century, these trading networks begin transforming. Christianization brings Scandinavian kingdoms into closer alignment with European commercial systems. The silver flow from Islamic lands diminishes as political changes disrupt Eastern routes. Towns like Hedeby face destruction and abandonment, while new centers emerge under royal patronage. Yet the commercial traditions established during the Viking Age persist, evolving into the Hanseatic networks that dominate Baltic trade for centuries to come. The transformation of raw materials into objects of lasting beauty represents one of the Viking world's most remarkable achievements. As commercial networks mature and wealth flows through Scandinavian ports, a class of specialized craftsmen emerges whose skills rival any in the medieval world. These artisans work in workshops attached to trading centers, in royal courts seeking prestige goods, and in rural communities where practical needs meet artistic ambition. Metalworking stands at the pinnacle of Norse craftsmanship. Smiths command respect bordering on reverence. Their ability to transform ore into gleaming weapons and intricate jewelry seeming almost magical to contemporaries. The forge becomes a sacred space where fire, iron, and skill combine. Pattern-welded sword blades require techniques passed through generations. The twisting and folding of different steel types creating both strength and distinctive surface patterns that ripple like water. Bronze and silver workers develop equally sophisticated methods. The filigree technique involves soldering tiny twisted wires onto metal surfaces, creating delicate patterns of extraordinary complexity. Granulation adds minute spheres of precious metal, each requiring precise temperature control to attach without melting. Brooches, arm rings, and pendants display these techniques in objects that serve both decorative and practical purposes, fastening cloaks while announcing their wearer's status. Wood carving reaches heights of expression visible in surviving ship timbers, church decorations, and everyday objects. The Oseberg ship burial preserves carved animal heads of startling sophistication, their interlaced bodies forming patterns that seem to writhe with life. This distinctive style evolves through recognizable phases, from the gripping beast motifs of the 9th century to the more refined ringerica and earnest styles of the 11th. Carvers apply these designs to everything from sledges to bedposts, transforming functional items into artistic statements. Textile production, primarily women's work, achieves equal sophistication. Weavers create complex patterns on upright looms, producing woolen fabrics dyed with imported materials and local plants. Tablet weaving produces decorative bands of remarkable intricacy. The Oseberg textiles reveal silk embroidery, evidence of both long-distance trade and refined aesthetic sensibilities. Alongside these material arts flourishes a tradition of verbal craftsmanship equally demanding. Skalds compose poetry following strict rules governing meter, alliteration, and the use of kennings, those compressed metaphors that transform the sea into the whale's road and blood into battle sweat. Court poets memorize vast quantities of verse, their memories preserving histories, genealogies, and mythological knowledge across generations. The relationship between patron and skald proves mutually beneficial. Kings and chieftains gain immortality through praise poems that celebrate their victories and generosity. Skalds receive rings, weapons, and positions of honor. The best poets achieve fame rivaling warriors, their compositions recited at feasts long after both poet and patron have died. These artistic traditions do not vanish with Christianization, but transform. Woodcarvers apply their skills to church decoration, creating the distinctive stave church portals where dragons and vines intertwine with Christian symbols. Metalworkers produce reliquaries and altar furnishings. Skalds adapt their techniques to compose Christian verse, while monks begin recording the oral traditions that might otherwise have been lost. The transformation of artistic traditions into Christian service mirrors a broader pattern visible throughout Norse society, where women navigate changing worlds while maintaining powers both visible and hidden. The legal codes that govern Scandinavian life reveal a social position for women remarkably different from their contemporaries elsewhere in medieval Europe. A free Norse woman possesses rights that would astonish observers from Frankish or Anglo-Saxon lands. She holds the keys to household stores, symbolized by the ornate key brooches found in wealthy female graves. This is no mere domestic detail. The keys represent genuine economic authority over substantial resources. A prosperous farm's stores include preserved meats, dried fish, grain, textiles, and trade goods worth considerable fortunes. The woman who controls these supplies wields real power over household survival and prosperity. Marriage in Norse society operates as a contractual arrangement where women retain significant protections. A bride's family negotiates her dowry, which remains her property throughout marriage. Should divorce occur, and Norse women can initiate divorce for valid reasons, she departs with her original dowry intact. Grounds for separation include a husband's violence, his wearing of effeminate clothing, or his failure to provide adequately. The divorced woman returns to her family's protection with her economic resources preserved. Property inheritance follows patterns that include daughters alongside sons. While firstborn males typically receive the largest shares, women inherit land, livestock, and movable wealth. Widows often manage substantial estates independently, making decisions about agriculture, trade, and household management without male oversight. The archaeological record confirms this authority through grave goods that include scales, weights, and trading equipment buried with women of merchant families. The figure of Aud the Deep-Minded exemplifies female leadership at its most dramatic. Following her husband's death in Scotland and her son's killing in Ireland around 870, this remarkable woman organizes the emigration of her entire household to Iceland. She commissions a ship's construction, gathers followers, and leads the voyage across the North Atlantic. Upon reaching Iceland, Aud claims extensive lands in the western fjords, distributing property to freed slaves and loyal retainers. She dies a Christian, one of the earliest in Iceland, having established a dynasty that shapes Icelandic history for generations. The question of shield maidens, women who fight alongside men in battle, generates enduring fascination. Sagas describe female warriors like Hervor and Brynhild, while Saxo Grammaticus records shield maidens at the Battle of Bravelir. Archaeological evidence has recently complicated scholarly skepticism. The Burka warrior grave, long assumed male based on weapons and military equipment, yielded female skeletal remains when subjected to modern analysis. Whether this represents an actual female warrior or a woman buried with symbolic military honors remains debated, but the grave challenges assumptions about rigid gender boundaries. Textile production represents perhaps the most economically significant female contribution to Viking society. The sails that power longships across oceans require enormous quantities of woven wool, each sail demanding years of spinning and weaving labor. A single ship's sail might consume the wool production of an entire district. Women who produce these essential materials contribute directly to the raiding, trading, and exploration that define the Viking Age. Their work enables the voyages that reshape medieval geography. Religious roles offer women additional avenues of influence. Vulvas, female seers who practice satyr magic, command respect and fear throughout Scandinavian society. These practitioners enter trance states to communicate with spirits, predict futures, and influence outcomes. Even kings consult vulvas before major undertakings. The elaborate staff burials found in female graves suggest the honored status these spiritual specialists achieve. As Christianization advances through the 11th century, women's formal powers gradually diminish while their informal influence persists. The Church introduces new restrictions on divorce and property rights, yet noble women continue shaping politics through marriages, regencies, and council. The transition from pagan to Christian society transforms but does not eliminate female agency in the Norse world. The same currents of change that reshape women's roles across Scandinavia also drive entire populations toward distant shores. As political consolidation under powerful kings threatens the independence that Norse freeholders cherish, many choose exile over submission. The island that emerges from Atlantic mists around 874 offers something unprecedented in the medieval world. Land without lords, territory without kings, a blank slate upon which refugees might inscribe entirely new forms of governance. Ingolfur Arnarson, according to later tradition, becomes the first permanent Norse settler when he establishes his farm at Reykjavik, the Bay of Smokes named for the geothermal steam rising from the earth. He follows the ancient custom of casting his high seat pillars overboard, allowing the gods to guide him toward his destined home. Where the carved wooden posts wash ashore, there he builds his longhouse. Within 60 years, virtually every habitable valley and coastal plain on this volcanic island hosts Norse farmsteads. The settlers arrive from Norway, from the Norse colonies in Britain and Ireland, from the Hebrides and Orkneys. They bring Celtic slaves and Irish wives, creating a population that genetic studies reveal as roughly equal parts Scandinavian and Celtic in origin. They bring livestock adapted to harsh climates, seeds for barley and hay, and the legal traditions of their homelands. What they deliberately leave behind are kings. The absence of centralized authority creates immediate practical problems. Disputes over land, inheritance, and honor require resolution. Blood feuds threaten to consume entire districts. The solution emerges gradually through the 900s as regional assemblies called things develop into a sophisticated legal framework. Local chieftains called Godar provide religious leadership and legal representation, their followers choosing which chieftain to support, rather than owing allegiance by birth or territory. In 930, representatives from across Iceland gather at Thingvellir, the assembly plains, to establish the Althing. This general assembly meets annually for 2 weeks each summer in a natural amphitheater formed by the rift between tectonic plates. Here, where the North American and Eurasian continental shelves visibly separate, a new form of governance takes shape. The law speaker, elected for 3-year terms, memorizes and recites the entire legal code, 1/3 each year, from the law rock overlooking the assembled freeholders. The legal system that develops proves remarkably sophisticated. Cases proceed through local courts before reaching the Althing's quarter courts, organized by geographic region. A 5th court handles appeals and deadlocked cases. Outlawry serves as the ultimate punishment, stripping offenders of all legal protection and forcing exile or death. The system relies entirely on private enforcement, with successful plaintiffs responsible for executing judgments against defendants. This republic of chieftains and freeholders produces the saga literature that preserves Viking Age memory for posterity. The Icelanders, literate after Christianization around 1000, record not only their own settlement history, but the mythology, poetry, and legendary tales of their Scandinavian ancestors. Without Icelandic scribes, much of what survives about Norse culture would have vanished entirely. The Althing continues meeting at Thingvellir for over 8 centuries, making it the longest-running parliamentary institution in human history. The volcanic landscape where freeholders once debated law codes now hosts tourists who walk the same paths between the same basalt cliffs. The experiment in governance that Norse refugees created on this remote island demonstrates that the Viking legacy extends far beyond raids and conquests into the foundations of democratic tradition itself. The same impulse that drives Icelandic settlers to establish parliamentary governance on volcanic shores propels others toward even more remote horizons. Around 982, a man named Eric Thorvaldsson, known to history as Eric the Red for his flame-colored hair and perhaps his temperament, finds himself outlawed from Iceland for 3 years, following killings that Norse law cannot overlook. Rather than submit to exile's shame, he transforms banishment into exploration. Eric sails westward toward rumors of land glimpsed decades earlier by storm-blown sailors. What he discovers after navigating treacherous ice-choked waters exceeds mere refuge. Massive fjords cut deep into mountainous coastlines. Glaciers calve icebergs into waters teeming with seals and walrus. The southwestern coast reveals protected valleys where grass grows thick during brief summers, where streams run clear with Arctic char, and where caribou herds migrate across tundra plateaus. The name Eric chooses for this discovery reveals calculated marketing genius. Greenland suggests pastoral abundance rather than ice-locked desolation. When his outlawry ends around 985, Eric returns to Iceland bearing tales of fertile lands awaiting settlement. His persuasion proves remarkably effective. 25 ships depart Iceland carrying perhaps 500 settlers, though only 14 vessels complete the dangerous crossing. Those who survive establish 2 main settlement areas along the southwestern coast. The eastern settlement, despite its name located on Greenland's southern tip, becomes the larger community. The western settlement lies further north along the coast. Between them, Norse colonists eventually occupy perhaps 300 farms scattered across habitable fjord systems. The population peaks at perhaps 3,000 to 5,000 souls, a remarkable achievement given the harsh environment. Survival demands adaptation to conditions unlike anything in Scandinavia or Iceland. The growing season permits only hay cultivation for livestock, making cattle and sheep the agricultural foundation, hunting supplements, farming in ways unknown in milder climates. Caribou provide meat and hides. Seals offer oil, meat, and skins essential for waterproofing. The colonists develop specialized hunting expeditions traveling far north to harvest walrus ivory and polar bear pelts. These Arctic products become Greenland's economic lifeline. Walrus ivory commands premium prices in European markets where elephant ivory grows scarce. Polar bear skins serve as royal gifts, exotic treasures that Greenlandic hunters alone can provide. Live polar bears occasionally travel to European courts as diplomatic presents. The rope made from walrus hide proves stronger than any hemp alternative, prized for ship rigging throughout the Norse world. The church establishes presence early in Greenland's colonization. A cathedral rises at Gardar in the eastern settlement, its stone walls enclosing the northernmost episcopal seat in medieval Christendom. Monasteries and convents follow, their ruins still visible against treeless landscapes. The Greenlanders pay tithes in the only currency available, sending walrus ivory and polar bear skins to distant Rome. Eric the Red establishes his farm at Brattahlid, where archaeological excavations reveal substantial buildings, including a small church reportedly built by his wife Theodhild after her conversion to Christianity. Eric himself reportedly resists the new faith, creating household tensions that later sagas dramatize. His son Leif grows up at Brattahlid before voyages carry him toward even more distant shores. The Greenland settlements represent humanity's furthest permanent expansion into the North Atlantic world. Beyond lies only ice and the unknown western lands that Leif Erikson will soon explore. The colonists maintain connections with Iceland and Norway through annual trading voyages, but distance and dangerous seas increasingly isolate them from European developments. They persist for nearly 5 centuries, adapting to climate fluctuations and changing trade conditions, until silence falls over the abandoned farms sometime in the 15th century. The silence that settles over Greenland's distant farms finds its counterpoint in the restless ambition of those raised within them. Around the year 1000 of the Common Era, Leif Erikson departs from Brattahlid with a crew of 35 men, sailing westward toward lands glimpsed but never explored by Norse eyes. The voyage follows reports brought back by Bjarni Herjolfsson, a merchant who sighted forested coastlines years earlier while blown off course during a journey to Greenland. Bjarni never landed, but his descriptions of timbered shores tantalize settlers living on treeless islands where driftwood represents precious cargo. Leif purchases Bjarni's ship and assembles experienced sailors willing to venture beyond all known waters. The crossing carries them first to a barren land of flat stones and glaciers, which Leif names Helluland, meaning slab land. Modern scholars identify this coastline with Baffin Island, where rocky shores match saga descriptions precisely. The expedition continues southward, encountering forested regions Leif calls Markland, the woodland, likely corresponding to Labrador's spruce-covered coasts. Here, the timber-starved Greenlanders recognize resources that could transform their struggling colony. Further south still, the explorers discover a land of mild climate, abundant salmon, and wild grapes growing along riverbanks. Leif names this territory Vinland, the wine land, though debate persists over whether the grapes were actual wine grapes or other berries that Norse travelers interpreted through familiar categories. The expedition constructs temporary shelters and spends one winter exploring before returning to Greenland laden with timber and tales of Western abundance. Archaeological evidence confirms Norse presence in North America at Lons o Meadows on Newfoundland's northern tip. Excavations beginning in 1960 reveal sod-walled structures identical to Icelandic and Greenlandic building traditions. Iron rivets, bronze pins, and a spindle whorl establish European origin beyond reasonable doubt. Radiocarbon dating places occupation around 1000 of the Common Era, matching saga chronologies with remarkable precision. The site functions as a base camp rather than permanent settlement. Workshops for iron smelting and boat repair suggest expeditions launching southward toward richer territories. Butternuts and butternut wood recovered from the site indicate travel to regions where these trees grow, at least as far south as New Brunswick or beyond. The Norse explore extensively, though their footprint remains archaeologically elusive outside this single confirmed location. Contact with indigenous peoples shapes subsequent expeditions. Later voyages led by Leif's siblings encounter inhabitants the Norse call Skraelings, a term applied to both Inuit in Greenland and indigenous Americans in Vinland. Initial trading exchanges of red cloth and milk for furs deteriorate into violent confrontations. Saga accounts describe battles where Norse iron weapons prove insufficient against numerically superior opponents wielding unfamiliar projectiles. Thorfinn Karlsefni leads the most ambitious colonization attempt around 1010 of the Common Era, bringing 60 men, 5 women, and livestock intended for permanent settlement. The expedition establishes itself in Vinland for 3 years, during which Karlsefni's wife Gudrid gives birth to Snorri, the first European born in the Americas. Persistent conflicts with indigenous populations ultimately convince the colonists that sustainable settlement remains impossible given their limited numbers. The Vinland voyages represent humanity's first documented contact between Old World and New World populations, 5 centuries before Columbus crosses the Atlantic. Yet this momentous encounter produces no lasting European presence. The Norse lack sufficient population to overwhelm indigenous resistance, and the distance from Greenland proves too great for reliable supply lines. Vinland becomes memory preserved in oral tradition, eventually recorded in Icelandic sagas that Europeans dismiss as fantasy until archaeological proof emerges in the 20th century. The expeditions demonstrate Viking navigational capabilities at their absolute peak, crossing open ocean without instruments, reading wave patterns and bird flights. These sailors achieve what no other Europeans attempt for another 500 years. Their failure to establish permanent colonies reflects not inadequacy but realistic assessment of sustainable expansion limits. The Western lands remain beyond practical reach, awaiting future centuries and different circumstances. While Norse explorers probed the Western Atlantic's limits, political ambitions closer to home reshaped the entire North Sea world. The same generation that witnesses Vinland's brief flowering also sees Scandinavian power achieve its greatest territorial expression. As Danish kings transform from coastal raiders into rulers of a maritime empire, stretching from the Baltic to the Irish Sea. Sweyn Forkbeard inherits Denmark around 986, but his ambitions extend far beyond his father's kingdom. Years of raiding English coasts have revealed Anglo-Saxon weakness, and the renewal of Danegeld payments demonstrates that silver flows more readily through intimidation than through trade. Sweyn's campaigns against England intensify through the late 990s, each expedition larger and more destructive than the last. The massacre of Danes in England on St. Brice's Day in 1002 reportedly claims his sister among its victims, transforming political calculation into personal vendetta. The invasion of 1013 represents not mere raiding, but systematic conquest. Sweyn's fleet carries an army intent on permanent occupation, and English resistance crumbles with remarkable speed. Northumbria and the Danelaw submit almost immediately, their populations remembering ancestral connections to Scandinavian settlers. Wessex follows, and by Christmas, King Ethelred flees to Normandy while Sweyn receives recognition as England's ruler. His triumph proves brief. Death claims him in February 1014, but the precedent of Danish kingship over England survives. Cnut, Sweyn's younger son, must reconquer what his father won. The campaign of 1015 through 1016 demonstrates military capability matching any contemporary commander. At Asandun in October 1016, Cnut's forces shatter English resistance under Edmund Ironside. The subsequent treaty divides England, but Edmund's death weeks later delivers the entire kingdom into Danish hands. Cnut enters London not as a foreign conqueror, but as England's legitimate king, married to Emma of Normandy, widow of the displaced Ethelred. The consolidation of power reveals administrative genius beneath warrior reputation. Cnut divides England into 4 great earldoms, balancing Danish and English nobles in positions of authority. He dismisses most of his invasion fleet, retaining only a household guard of elite warriors whose loyalty depends entirely on royal favor. English laws continue largely unchanged, and the Church receives generous patronage that transforms a pagan conqueror's son into Christianity's devoted servant. Denmark falls to Knut upon his brother's death in 1018, uniting the two kingdoms under single rule. Norway proves more difficult. Its independent-minded jarls resist foreign domination, but by 1028, Knut's combination of military pressure and strategic bribery forces King Olaf into exile. The North Sea Empire reaches its maximum extent. England, Denmark, Norway, and overlordship of parts of Sweden, all acknowledging one ruler whose court at Winchester rivals any in Europe. The empire's coherence depends entirely on Cnut's personal authority. No institutional framework binds these disparate kingdoms together beyond shared allegiance to their king. Knut travels constantly between his realms, dispensing justice, collecting revenues, and reminding local magnates of his presence. His pilgrimage to Rome in 1027 demonstrates international prestige as he negotiates with the Pope and the Holy Roman Emperor as an equal among Christian monarchs. Yet the empire contains the seeds of its own dissolution. Knut's death in 1035 triggers immediate fragmentation. His sons prove incapable of maintaining their father's achievement, and within 7 years, England returns to Anglo-Saxon rule under Edward the Confessor, while Norway and Denmark pursue separate paths. The North Sea Empire vanishes as quickly as it arose, a personal achievement rather than an enduring political structure, demonstrating both the heights Viking power could reach and the limits of kingdoms built on individual charisma rather than institutional foundations. The collapse of Cnut's empire reveals a deeper transformation already underway across the Norse world, one that reshapes not merely political boundaries, but the fundamental spiritual architecture of Scandinavian civilization. The White Christ, as Norse peoples call the Christian God, advances not through conquest alone, but through the slow accumulation of conversions, marriages, and calculated royal decisions that remake society from its foundations. The process begins decades before Cnut's reign, in scattered conversions along trade routes where Norse merchants encounter Christian communities. In Hedeby and Birka, small churches rise among pagan temples during the mid-10th century, serving foreign traders and the curious locals who drift toward this new faith. Missionaries from Hamburg-Bremen venture northward, finding occasional welcome among chieftains who recognize political advantages in alignment with Christian kingdoms. Yet these early efforts produce limited results, as the old gods retain their hold on populations whose ancestors have honored them for countless generations. The transformation accelerates through royal conversion. Harald Bluetooth of Denmark accepts baptism around 965, commemorating his achievement on the Great Gelling Stone that proclaims he made the Danes Christian. This declaration simplifies a complex reality, as popular practice continues blending old and new for generations. Yet Harald's conversion establishes a pattern repeated across Scandinavia, where kings recognize that Christianity offers not merely spiritual truth, but political legitimacy, administrative sophistication, and alliance with powerful Christian neighbors. Norway's conversion proves more violent. Olaf Tryggvason, returning from Viking expeditions in England already baptized, seizes the Norwegian throne in 995 and pursues aggressive Christianization. His methods include destruction of temples, execution of those who refuse baptism, and forced conversion of entire districts. His reign ends at the Battle of Svolder in 1000, but his successor Olaf Haraldsson continues the campaign with equal fervor. Olaf Haraldsson's death at Stiklestad in 1030 paradoxically accelerates conversion, as miracles attributed to his remains transform the fallen king into Saint Olaf, Norway's eternal patron whose cult spreads throughout the Norse world. Sweden resists longest, with the great temple at Uppsala continuing pagan sacrifices into the late 11th century. Adam of Bremen describes ceremonies there around 1070, where humans and animals hang from sacred trees in offerings to Odin, Thor, and Freyr. Yet even Uppsala eventually yields, its temple destroyed and a Christian church rising on the same sacred ground by the early 12th century. The transformation reshapes daily existence. Churches replace temples as community centers. Christian burial in consecrated ground supplants cremation and ship graves. The 7-day week organized around Sunday worship restructures time itself. Monasteries introduce literacy, record-keeping, and agricultural innovations that increase productivity. Marriage becomes a church sacrament rather than a family contract, altering inheritance patterns and women's legal positions. Yet, conversion never achieves complete erasure. Old beliefs persist in folk practices, seasonal celebrations, and the very language that preserves God's names in weekdays. The sagas, written by Christian monks, preserve pagan mythology with remarkable fidelity. Thor's hammer pendants give way to crosses, but craftsmen apply identical artistic techniques to both. The transformation represents not replacement, but synthesis, as Norse Christianity develops distinctive characteristics reflecting its pagan heritage, creating the cultural foundation upon which medieval Scandinavian kingdoms will build their futures. The synthesis of Christian and pagan traditions that reshape Scandinavian society produces a generation of rulers who embody both worlds, warriors baptized in the new faith, yet driven by ambitions as vast as any saga hero. Among these figures, none captures the Viking spirit's final flowering more completely than Harald Sigurdsson, born around 1015 into the Norwegian royal house during years of bitter civil conflict. The young prince receives his baptism of fire at 15, fighting alongside his half-brother Olaf at the Battle of Stiklestad in 1030. The catastrophic defeat that claims Olaf's life sends Harald fleeing eastward with wounds that would have killed lesser men. This exile marks not an ending, but a beginning, launching a journey that will carry him across the known world before returning him to claim Norway's throne. The wounded prince travels first to the Kyivan Rus, where Yaroslav the Wise rules a realm built by earlier Norse adventurers. Here, Harald recovers, learns the arts of statecraft, and gathers followers drawn by his royal blood and warrior reputation. Yet, Kyiv proves merely a way station. The greatest opportunity lies further south, where Constantinople's golden domes promise wealth and glory beyond imagination. Around 1034, Harald enters the service of the Byzantine Empire, joining the Varangian Guard that serves as the emperor's elite bodyguard. The next decade transforms the Norwegian exile into one of the Mediterranean world's most formidable military commanders. He fights across Sicily against Arab forces, campaigns in Bulgaria, and participates in palace intrigues that see emperors rise and fall. Byzantine sources record his exploits with a mixture of admiration and wariness, noting both his military brilliance and his dangerous ambition. The wealth Harald accumulates during these years becomes legendary. Gold, silver, precious gems, and Byzantine silks flow into his personal treasury through legitimate rewards, plunder, and arrangements that blur the line between both. He sends much of this fortune northward to Yaroslav for safekeeping, building the financial foundation for future ambitions. When he finally departs Constantinople around 1042, possibly fleeing after involvement in political complications, he carries resources sufficient to purchase a kingdom. His return journey passes through Kyiv, where he marries Yaroslav's daughter Elisiv, cementing alliances that span from Scandinavia to Byzantium. By 1045, Harald reaches Scandinavia, initially sharing power with his nephew Magnus in Norway before Magnus's death in 1047 leaves him sole ruler. The exile has returned as king, his Byzantine experience having forged him into a ruler unlike any Scandinavia has known. Harald's reign over Norway spans nearly 2 decades of consolidation, conflict, and relentless ambition. He earns the epithet Hardrada, meaning hard ruler, through methods that combine Byzantine sophistication with Viking ruthlessness. His campaigns against Denmark's swine Estridsson continue intermittently for years, neither side achieving decisive victory. Yet Harald's gaze increasingly turns westward, toward England, where he believes ancient claims and current opportunities converge. The death of England's Edward the Confessor in January 1066 creates the crisis Harald has awaited. When Harald Godwinson seizes the English throne, Harald Hardrada sees his moment. Gathering perhaps 300 ships and thousands of warriors, he launches the last great Viking invasion of England in September 1066. Initial victories at Fulford encourage belief that the crown lies within reach. Yet at Stamford Bridge on September 25th, an arrow through the throat ends Harold's ambitions, and, with them, the Viking Age itself. The arrow that pierces Harald Hardrada's throat at Stamford Bridge on September 25th, 1066, does more than end a single warrior's life. It extinguishes the last flame of an era that has burned across 3 centuries, transforming the medieval world through fire, trade, and settlement. The Norwegian king falls amid the chaos of battle, his dreams of an English crown dissolving into the Yorkshire earth, where thousands of his warriors already lie scattered. The English army that delivers this defeat has marched nearly 200 miles in 4 days, a feat of endurance that speaks to the desperation Harald Godwinson feels. Word of the Norwegian invasion reached him in the south, where he waited for a different threat entirely. Now his exhausted forces stand victorious over the broken remnants of the last great Viking expedition, yet they cannot rest. Another invasion fleet already crosses the Channel. William of Normandy, himself descended from the Viking chieftain Rollo, who carved a duchy from Frankish territory a century and a half earlier, lands at Pevensey on September 28th. The timing proves catastrophic for Harald Godwinson, whose army must now reverse its grueling march and race southward to meet this new danger. The men who fought at Stamford Bridge barely have time to catch their breath before they are called upon to defend their kingdom once more. The Battle of Hastings on October 14th unfolds on Senlac Hill, where English shield walls face Norman cavalry charges throughout a long autumn day. Harald Godwinson's army, depleted and exhausted from their northern campaign, holds firm for hours against repeated assaults. The discipline that crushed Harald Hardrada's Vikings proves equally formidable against Norman knights. Yet attrition and tactical deception gradually erode English strength. The death of Harald Godwinson, traditionally depicted with an arrow through his eye, marks the moment when Anglo-Saxon England effectively ends. The shield wall collapses, and with it falls the last kingdom capable of resisting Norman conquest. William's victory transforms not merely political arrangements, but the fundamental character of English society, language, and culture for centuries to come. The irony embedded in this transformation runs deep. The Normans who conquer England are themselves descendants of Vikings. Their very name derived from the Northmen who settled Frankish territory under Rollo's leadership. The Battle of Hastings thus represents not simply the defeat of one people by another, but the triumph of Vikings who had become French over Anglo-Saxons who had absorbed Danish settlers. The Danelaw's legacy meets Normandy's ambition on an English hillside. Across Scandinavia, the news of Stamford Bridge and Hastings arrives as winter settles over the northern lands. The failure of Harald Hardrada's expedition marks the definitive end of large-scale Viking military ventures against Western Europe. Future Scandinavian kings will focus their energies on consolidating domestic power rather than seeking foreign conquests. The age of the longship raid has passed. The transformation is not sudden, but represents the culmination of processes already well advanced. Christianization has reshaped Norse society, replacing the warrior ethos that drove expansion with values emphasizing stability and salvation. The trading networks that once funneled wealth into Scandinavian ports have shifted as European states develop their own commercial capabilities. The technological advantages that made Viking longships supreme have been matched and exceeded by other naval traditions. In the decades following 1066, the last echoes of Viking activity fade across the North Atlantic. Greenland settlements persist in increasing isolation, their connection to European trade networks growing ever more tenuous. Vinland becomes a memory preserved in sagas rather than a destination for continued exploration. The westward expansion that once seemed limitless contracts back toward Scandinavian shores. Yet endings contain within them the seeds of new beginnings. The Norman conquest carries Viking blood and cultural influences deep into English society, where they merge with Anglo-Saxon and Celtic traditions to create something entirely new. The Scandinavian kingdoms that emerge from the Viking Age develop into stable medieval states whose descendants will eventually build global empires of their own. The energy that once drove longships across unknown oceans transforms into the foundation of modern Nordic nations. The transformation begins not with conquest, but with inheritance. William, Duke of Normandy, who claims the English throne at Hastings, carries within his bloodline the legacy of Rollo and generations of Norse settlers who became French lords. His victory in 1066 does not end Viking influence in England, but rather transmutes it, embedding Scandinavian administrative practices and cultural attitudes deep within the structures of Norman rule. The Domesday Book, commissioned by William in 1086, reveals a kingdom being systematically catalogued and reorganized. This comprehensive survey of English lands and resources reflects both Norman efficiency and the older Scandinavian tradition of precise record-keeping that characterized trading centers like Hedeby and Birka. The same impulse that drove Norse merchants to weigh silver with careful accuracy now manifests in the meticulous accounting of every hide of land, every mill, every fish pond across the conquered realm. Norman castles rise across the English landscape, their stone walls replacing the wooden fortifications of earlier centuries. These structures embody a new kind of power, permanent and imposing, yet their builders carry the restless energy of their Viking ancestors. Within 2 generations, Norman knights push into Wales, establish footholds in Ireland, and dream of Mediterranean conquests. Roger of Hauteville, another descendant of Norse settlers, carves out a kingdom in Sicily that blends Norman military prowess with Byzantine sophistication and Islamic learning. Meanwhile, the Scandinavian homelands undergo their own profound consolidation. Denmark under Valdemar the Great, who reigns from 1157 to 1182, transforms from a collection of competing chieftains into a centralized medieval kingdom. The Old Thing assemblies continue to meet, but royal authority increasingly supersedes their decisions. Stone churches replace wooden temples, their spires marking a landscape once dominated by sacred groves and burial mounds. Norway follows a similar trajectory, though the mountainous terrain and scattered fjord settlements make centralization more challenging. The civil wars that racked the kingdom throughout the 12th century gradually resolve into a stable monarchy, with Bergen emerging as the primary commercial center. The old warrior aristocracy adapts to new realities, trading longship raids for landed estates and positions within the royal administration. Sweden's transformation proceeds more slowly, the vast forests and lakes of the interior resisting easy integration. Yet, here too, the Uppsala kings gradually extend their authority, and the ancient pagan center becomes a Christian archbishopric. The Varangian connections to the east fade as the Kievan Rus develops its own distinct identity, though Swedish merchants continue trading across the Baltic. The descendants of Vikings become builders of cathedrals, founders of monasteries, patrons of learning. The same hands that once gripped sword hilts now turn manuscript pages, copying Latin texts and composing chronicles that preserve memories of the heroic age. The sagas take written form during this period, oral traditions transformed into literature that will captivate readers for centuries to come. Trade networks persist and evolve. The Hanseatic League, emerging in the late 12th century, inherits the commercial infrastructure that Norse merchants established generations earlier. German traders operating from Bergen and other Scandinavian ports follow routes first charted by Viking predecessors, though their cogs and hulks lack the elegant lines of the longship. The genetic and cultural legacy spreads invisibly through populations across Europe. In the Danelaw regions of England, in Normandy, in Sicily, in the lands of the Rus, descendants of Norse settlers intermarry with local populations, their Viking heritage becoming one thread among many in the complex tapestry of medieval society. Place names preserve memories of Scandinavian settlement, linguistic traces that endure long after the original settlers' grandchildren have forgotten their ancestors' tongue. The linguistic inheritance proves perhaps the most intimate and enduring of all Viking legacies, woven so deeply into everyday speech that modern English speakers invoke Norse heritage without conscious awareness. Words fundamental to daily existence carry Scandinavian origins across centuries of transformation. The sky above, the window through which light enters, the egg consumed at breakfast, the knife that cuts bread, the husband and wife who share a home, the anger that flares, and the happy contentment that follows reconciliation, all derived from Old Norse roots transplanted into Anglo-Saxon soil during the Danelaw period. The very pronouns they, their, and them replaced native English forms, a grammatical revolution reflecting the depth of cultural integration between Norse settlers and their neighbors. Legal concepts travel forward through time with equal persistence. The word law itself comes from Old Norse lag, and the parliamentary traditions that spread from Westminster across the globe carry genetic connections to the Althing established at Thingvellir in 930. The principle of representative assembly, of free men gathering to debate and decide collective matters, finds expression in institutions from the United States Congress to the parliaments of former British colonies spanning 5 continents. The jury system, developed in medieval England, incorporates Scandinavian concepts of communal judgment that Norse settlers brought to the Danelaw. Navigation techniques pioneered by Viking seafarers influence maritime traditions for centuries after the last longship beaches for the final time. The understanding of ocean currents, the reading of bird flight patterns, the observation of whale movements and cloud formations, all pass through generations of sailors who never know the origins of their inherited knowledge. When later European explorers venture across the Atlantic, they follow conceptual pathways first charted by Norse predecessors, even when specific routes differ. The genetic legacy spreads through populations in patterns that modern science only recently begins to trace. Deoxyribonucleic acid analysis reveals Scandinavian ancestry distributed across populations from the British Isles to Eastern Europe, from Iceland to Sicily. The descendants of Viking settlers number in the tens of millions, their heritage diluted through centuries of intermarriage, yet still detectable in the molecular record of human inheritance. Cultural fascination with the Viking Age intensifies rather than diminishes with temporal distance. The 19th century witnesses romantic revival of Norse themes in literature, art, and music. The 20th and 21st centuries transform Vikings into subjects of scholarly research, popular entertainment, and national identity. Museums from Oslo to Dublin to York preserve artifacts that connect modern visitors to medieval craftsmen. Archaeological discoveries continue to reshape understanding, each excavation adding nuance to the portrait of a civilization far more complex than the raiders of popular imagination. The transformation from pagan warriors to Christian kingdoms, from isolated Scandinavian communities to participants in European civilization, represents one of history's most remarkable cultural evolutions. The Vikings did not disappear, but rather became something new, their descendants building the foundations of modern Denmark, Norway, Sweden, and Iceland, while simultaneously contributing to the genetic and cultural heritage of nations across 4 continents. Thank you for joining this complete journey through the Viking Age. If you found this exploration of history meaningful, please subscribe to the channel so you will not miss future documentaries that bring the past to life.